Hello, everyone, and welcome to. I guess actually, I'm thinking about it. This is our I believe our final pre-recorded segment for the Makers Arcade, or semi-final. Maybe there's one more after this. I don't know what the schedule is.
Final.
Final, two. I am your host, Matt from the Makers Arcade. I am joined by the Mechbird team. Hello, Mechbird.
Hello, Matt.
Hello.
Tatiana, Olivier, would you like to tell us a bit about yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Tatiana. I'm a game designer and artist based in Paris, France. And I have a multimedia project titled Mechbird, and I'm working on it with Olivier Drouet.
Hi, I'm Olivier. I'm a French game designer and game developer, and I work on the Mechbird project with Tatiana, mostly as a game developer, working on Unity for the most part.
And today we're looking at, I guess, 3 games of yours. 2 that we'll talk about now. One that we'll be transitioning to a live video for to get more into more of a interactive piece on that. So I guess to start, let's talk about Keyboard Landscaper. Tatiana, how would you describe Keyboard Landscaper in a few words and in I don't know, one sentence?
So Keyboard Landscaper is a music sequencer that's also a way to paint a digital canvas. So you can both create music and paint a canvas at the same time with this game.
It's both a great description in that it tells you exactly what you're doing, but doesn't tell you at all how you do it. Yeah, I mean it's a fascinatingly relaxing experience of just sort of opening it up, seeing a nice sort of empty horizon, and tapping, or depending on your mood going into the game, either gently tapping or just sort of mashing your keyboard and watching things sprout out of nothing.
That's an accurate description.
And it is a musical game, which I know is something that ties together a lot of the projects you've done. Could you tell us a bit about like the role of music in your game design process and your game design sort of interests?
So it will be hard to talk a bit about it.
Yes.
But I will.
Well, talk for as long as you want to. We got time.
Great. So yeah, music in general is something that always obsessed me with my games. I started really my second game with Mechbird was already about music, more specifically about phasing in music, which is a concept by Steve Reich of basically aligning or not some tracks and what kind of effects it can have in the music. But yeah, music theory more precisely is something that I'm kind of obsessed with. I'm trying to make riddles and puzzle games based on music theory somehow. And Keyboard Landscaper is one of them.
Although, interestingly, you don't really need to know any music theory to play it. But if you do know music theory, you're going to open this up and be like, okay, yeah.
Absolutely. So that's the whole point, to make something that is based on music theory, but that's accessible and enjoyable by an audience that knows nothing about it. Otherwise, it would be just games for experts of some sort, and this is not what I'm aiming for at all. The point is more like to focus on how music theory can help create a certain mood or a certain vibe in a game, but also how you can use it to make some riddles. So, for example, in Keyboard Landscaper, how is it that anything you will play will sound great no matter what you do? This is the kind of reason I'm using music theory in my riddles and puzzles.
It's very fun to have this, because it's almost an instrument in itself. One that has that requires no training to play, and you could just sort of like jump straight into it.
Absolutely. So one of the big inspiration for it was the tenorion. It's an instrument by a game designer and artist called Toshio Iwai. He's Japanese, and he made a game for Nintendo DS, I think. It's Electroplankton.
Mhm.
And he made a musical instrument, so the tenorion, which is basically a kind of launch pad or drum pad. And you will be able to press some buttons, and it will start, well, as a sequencer, it will loop whatever you decided to trigger on the instrument. And so the whole point was to make the same, but with a very boring traditional keyboard with it. So using the keyboard and the matrix of the keyboard rather than the alphabetical and numerical information you have on the keyboard. So basically, turn the keyboard into a musical instrument.
It's interesting because you mentioned Electroplankton when the last time we were talking about this, and I was like, that sounds kind of familiar. But the added detail that it was a DS game was like, oh yeah, I played that.
Yeah, and even people that don't have a Nintendo DS, if you play Super Smash Bros.
Yeah, there's a stage.
There's a stage with leaves that are interactives. Well, this stage is coming from Electroplankton, actually.
Oh.
So it's maybe not a famous game, but famous enough to
Famous
have
enough.
its own level.
Yep,
Yeah.
it is famous enough to make it to Smash. I will admit, and I'm now ashamed to say this, I do have that disabled in my stage rotation because it's such a bright color of green. It's kind of hard to look at. But I did have a lot of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's actually not maybe not the best stage when it comes to, not the best level when it comes to actually playing a competitive game, but
Yeah.
it's a fun stage to play in.
It is a fun stage to play in because you have this sort of toy that is the environment. And I remember it took me like many rounds of getting that stage and being like, the bright green, to be like, wait a second, I could do something with this plant. Sorry, bit of a tangent there.
Quick digression, sure. So yeah, this was one of the inspiration for a keyboard landscaper. The other reason we used the tenorion is because the tenorion has another common point with our game, is that usually it's using at least one given scale or even a pentatonic scale. And pentatonic scale, which are scales based on 5 notes rather than 12, to put it simply, is a scale that will sound great no matter what you do. So this is one of the reasons why in Keyboard Landscaper, whatever you play will sound great. To the point where is actually there is a fun fact I didn't tell you yet. So we had a streamer playing Keyboard Landscaper. We didn't know about it. We discovered it on YouTube like anyone else. And the streamer is saying, "Oh, the music is nice." And I suspect that the streamer doesn't know, well, played it quickly and didn't know that actually the music is being done by herself, by the player. So it sounds so great that actually people don't even notice they are the one creating it sometimes.
I mean, that's the dream, right? You've created a music engine that will bring everybody who plays it and makes that mistake is going to walk away thinking, man, that Mechbird team knows how to write a great soundtrack.
Exactly. That's awesome. I love it. So I love superstition in general. A lot of another thing that we never talked about. So
Yeah, no, I want to go down this path for sure.
So maybe we will talk about another musical game we made, Contre Ciel. And in this game, there are a lot of superstitions coming from how we designed the game, and that's something I love. So I can give, I will give, if we talk about it, I will give concrete examples. But
no,
basically,
let's talk about it. I mean, it's a somewhat similar game experience to Keyboard Landscaper anyway, right?
Yeah. We have that. We don't have a strong identity, creative identity, but there are themes that are coming back in most of our games, like using music theory somehow to make else riddles or a grammar of interaction that is not given to the player. And instead, players have to discover by themselves what's the grammar of interaction. How do I actually make something something precise in the game? So, Contre Ciel, to put it simply, it's an artificial sky that is hanging from the ceiling, sorry. And there's a keyboard, a musical keyboard, basically a piano under it. And people can play the piano, and it will change the weather, the night and day cycle, the planet from which you watch the sky, depending on what you play. But we don't tell players how to make these changes happen. Instead, they have to actually play and try to figure out how to make this. And it's based on music theory, so I can spoil this. Especially the part where like the rain will be related to a bit darker scales of some sort. And so we are making a lot of games like this, what we call Rosetta Stones to explore. The whole point is to get how you intervene, how you influence the game system. And we made a bunch of games like this. One of them was Intact, that I never talked about. It's a long story, but basically it's a full immersive room, and players can touch a kind of artificial sky that I made to alter to change the weather locally. And and there is some combinations possible. And just to give you an example, if you make storms everywhere, it will artificially crash, of course, at some point. The thing is, it's again a Rosetta Stone to explore. So we don't tell players what's the grammar of interaction. And because of this, a lot of people start getting very superstitious. So you can be sure that if they, I don't know, like tie their laces at some point, and a storm started at this time, well, of course, people will think that, oh yeah, when you bend over,
That's
maybe
so
the
good.
storm might come. And I love superstitions like this.
Oh, that's beautiful. That must be the best feeling in the world as a game designer, to watch someone just like have no idea what they're doing that's triggering a certain interaction with your game.
Not only that, but they tell each other how it's working. So not only will they get superstitious, they will start spreading false information, but thinking they are not doing so, of course, thinking that's the right info. So you will have some players telling other players that, oh no, that's not how you start the storm. To start the storm, you have to bend over, which is impossible because we don't have any Kinect in this installation, no webcams, nothing. Like we cannot capture what players are doing beside touching the sky. Everything is touch based. So yeah, I love seeing people. Maybe I'm a bit statistical in this, but it's really funny to see people getting superstitious in the installation.
One thing I also want to say, I think we've already mentioned 2 other games of yours. For people watching at home, if you want to see photos of any of these games, learn more about them, you can head to mechbird.fr. I would say Intact in particular, I mean, a lot of the games you've made are quite beautiful. The photography for Intact is quite stunning, just because it's all beautiful backlit fluffscapes with hands on it. It's really, really fun to look at.
It was a lot of work regarding the making, the purely making the stuff, because this is an installation with quadriphonic sound. So basically 4 speakers that are specialized related to space.
Yes, spatial, yeah.
Specialized, yeah. So basically we play a lot on the panoramic sound. Panoramic. I don't know how to say it.
No, you got it right. You're good.
And no screen, as many of our games are based on fully lights, just LEDs, sound. We try as much as possible to not use screens, which doesn't mean we have a problem with screens, and we use screens, of course, when we have to. But when we can afford not to, we try to, because one of our goals in Mechbird is to get the game outside of the screen, to not make people play in a virtual space behind the window, but actually bring out the digital magic out of the screen, out of this window that is confining experience usually.
It's fascinating that you phrase it that way, because I remember having a conversation very similar about that concept of like the fun of the game happens almost outside of the game interface with Alistair, your co-host on the I don't actually know what should I meant to say this before. You should feel free to plug any projects you want during this this session. This is a free mic for any of your PR work, but I know you're working on I believe a recurring segment with Indiecade on alternate control games with Alistair, who folks who are watching this live, you might have seen yesterday, showcasing the book Ritual. But he said something similar around like to him as a game designer, he talked about how the most interesting part of play is what happens around the game. And the idea with installations, and it's now clicking to me that, of course, this is something that you would have in common, is that there is this element of like, how are people interacting with each other outside of the game space, both the superstition piece and like that sort of environment. That's really... It's really fascinating. This is why I love talking to people who work in the alt-control space.
And what's cool is that if most games were like this, well, we wouldn't need to do it. But the thing is, there is a strong injunction to digital immersion in video game industry. When you do a video game that is supposed to be sold online, let's say you do even an indie game for Steam, you are expected to immerse people in the digital space as much as possible. So as it is the dominant injunction, the what we are supposed to do, of course, creators that are trying to explore the uncharted territory of playfulness will try not to do this, because first thing we do when we ask us to do something is, well, actually try not to do it, obviously.
So it's we're going down this fun path of games that don't use screens, games that don't use keyboards, but we are also here to talk about 2 games that you made that use keyboards and screens. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we are in a specific situation right now, where screens can be used in really cool ways, and Keyboard Landscaper was made in the same context as the second games we submitted to the IMS, and we are really happy to present. So thank you. We never said thank you actually so far, so maybe
it has been a delight. It is. Okay. It's absolutely my pleasure. 2 calls in, 1 more on the calendar. I'm having a great time.
So do I. So yeah, the second game, Good Soup. The Keyboard Landscaper and Good Soup MF were made during the Alt Control at Home Jam, which is a game jam I started out of the blue on itch.io during the second lockdown in France. So basically in France, we had 2 lockdowns. And today, actually, at the day of the recording, of course, so a week in the past for people watching this, we had our 3rd lockdown. Surprise, surprise. And so during the second lockdown, I made this jam called Alt Control at Home. And the idea is that alternative controller games and playful installations are really hard to define. I mean, usually when we talk about alternative controller games, what we have in mind are DIY homemade controllers to play a game, even maybe a video game. And the thing is, it's really hard to trace back alternative controller games. Like maybe we could say it started with interactive art, so in the 80s basically, but this is if we mean that it needs to be digital and about playfulness of some sort. If we say that it needs to be a game, we had a lot of creative initiatives in the 90s and especially in early 2000s. I'm thinking about Paint Station, for example, by the German collective Fur. So Paint Station, to put it really simply, let's say it's a Pong, but each time you make a mistake, you get an electric shock, or you get your hand slapped really hard by a plastic lanyard of some sort. So basically, they work a lot on physical pain. And so this was in 2001 or so. So it was a long time ago. So it's really hard to define alternative controller
How
games.
far we've come, you know?
Yeah. Like it's not what we are talking about. But if we are talking about the current movement, again, even just the name was really, let's say, institutionalized in a way, or at least made popular by the GDC. But well, it's really hard to define. The only common parameter in every alt control game I can find, and it's really just personal, it's that these are experiences that are else toys or games that challenges that challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge to standard interfaces. And what is surprising is that if we define it that way, actually most alt control games are based on DIY stuff, and very few are based on hijacking or repurposing or recycling standard controllers. There are some. I'm thinking about Johann Sebastian Joust and Sports Friends in general, everything made by the Copenhagen Game Collective and Die Gute Fabrik and collectives like this, but it's not that common. So the idea for the Alt Control at Home Jam was to offer alt control developers to hijack standard controllers in two ways, basically. Else by using it in an uncommon way. So you have an example of Ludipe, which is a Spanish developer, and he made a tie simulator 2020. So it's a game about tying the tie, and you have to hold your keyboard like this to play like you are tying your tie on it. And the second way to do it is to add daily objects to the mix. And this is what I tried to do with Good Soup MF. So basically, in Good Soup MF, you have to use chopsticks to move the joystick of a standard Xbox controller, which is super hard.
Absolute nightmare.
Even for the video I was making to actually show people how it's played, I had to do it 5 or 6 times maybe just to make it right and show people the winning end. And just to finish on something, the idea didn't came to me because I'm some sort of alt control genius. It's a lot based on an art movement in France coming from the 60s that I really like. That's called the Oulipo. It stands for Ouvroir de littérature potentielle. So potential literary. I shouldn't have started this translation. Ouvroir. And so basically, these were people trying first to write stories. So they were writers, but using some creative games. You can think about Exquisite Cadaver, for example. This is the kind of stuff they were doing. And one of the most famous books in this movement is L'Infraordinaire, the Infraordinary, which is all about how to question your daily surrounding, your daily environment, to try to overcome what you think you know about it. So there is a really famous quote in it that is also in my Twitter bio, that is question your little spoons, which means like question the use of what you think you know. So a spoon can be used to eat, but can it be used to play? Like, can you take your spoon and just try to maybe launch something with it, or maybe use the spoon to press on the keyboard and so on. So this is how I started Good Soup MF.
And it's interesting because, like you said, both Good Soup and Keyboard Landscaper were submitted for this jam. Where in Good Soup, you're saying, well, let's take this tool designed for eating and make a game out of it. And in Keyboard Landscaper, you're saying, hey, let's take a keyboard and completely abstract away the meaning of the buttons as we know them, and instead say, no, this is just a grid of switches, and we're going to do something different and fun and experimental with that. And very relaxing. You've submitted one very relaxing game and another deeply stressful one. And a third game, which actually sort of fits into what we were talking about earlier around music and music theory. Which let's take a look at that now. So we're gonna end the sort of pre-recorded content here and skip over to live for everyone watching. See you in real time in a few minutes.
Bye, people in the future. Bye, Matt.